Welcome back to The Explainer. Now, when most of us think about Bram Stoker's Dracula, our minds instantly go to, crumbling Gothic castles, screeching bats, maybe some creeping fog. But what if I told you that is really only half the story? Today, we're absolutely shattering that dusty illusion. We are going to reframe Dracula, not just as a classic ghost story, but as a deeply modern, high-tech thriller that perfectly captures late Victorian anxieties. Because in this world, cutting-edge science, brand new technology, and even the intricacies of the English language itself, they become the primary battlegrounds against the undead. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to look at where science meets superstition. Then we'll dive into the epistolary defense, followed by technology as a weapon. After that, we're going to get into the villain's headspace with mastering the English language. And we'll wrap it all up with the power of voice. Let's get into it. All right, part 1. Science meets superstition, focusing right in on the medical mystery at the heart of the whole story. When the mysteriously ill Lucy Westenra takes a turn for the worse, Professor Van Helsing steps in with this truly wild, dual approach to save her. Just look at the stark contrast here. On one side, you have modern medicine. We're talking highly experimental blood transfusions. But on the exact same token, you have ancient superstitions, literal garlic, and crucifixes. It's a perfect snapshot of Victorian society's broader struggle, that tug of war between embracing modern science and clinging to traditional beliefs. Van Helsing is basically admitting right out loud that empirical science alone just wasn't going to cut it against supernatural forces. But this brings up a genuinely terrifying question. Why were Lucy's blood transfusions so dangerous in the first place? If you read the text, her health is all over the map, bouncing wildly between these temporary recoveries and sudden brutal relapses. It drives a ton of the plot's suspense. But there is actually a massive medical anomaly hiding in plain sight here. Here is the crazy part. Medical understanding in the Victorian era was basically in its absolute infancy. Those repeated blood transfusions given to Lucy were incredibly dangerous because they were performed with unmatched blood types. They literally didn't understand blood compatibility yet, so they're performing these procedures without any concern for the massive, often fatal, complications that mismatched blood can cause. Think about that. While Dracula is draining her blood, the very experimental science that's supposed to be saving her is actually reflecting the terrifying, deadly limits of 19th century knowledge. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the epistolary defense. Let's see how these characters actually try to impose some order on all this chaos. You probably noticed that throughout the story, the characters are obsessively documenting everything. Diaries, journals, letters, you name it. They are fighting back against the sheer terror of the unknown by imposing strict, rational order. And their absolute best tool for this? Shorthand, stenography. It's a method of rapid writing that uses symbols instead of standard letters. But for Jonathan and Mina Harker, who are, these young, very modern professionals, shorthand is way more than just taking fast notes. For them, it acts as an encrypted, secret language. It completely locks out anyone who isn't trained in this highly specific modern skill. And let me tell you, this modern defense mechanism drives the Count absolutely crazy. When Dracula discovers Jonathan's shorthand letters, he is horrified. He can't read the symbols at all, and he literally calls it a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. I mean, think about it. He's this centuries-old, incredibly powerful warlord, but he is completely infuriated and shut out by office skills. He physically cannot penetrate their modern information network. Which brings us right into Section 3, technology as a weapon. Our heroes aren't just running around with wooden stakes and holy water. They are packing a highly specific, modern technological arsenal. We're talking the phonograph, shorthand, and the typewriter. Now, to us, these sound like antique office supplies, but in the late 19th century, these were high-performance weapons against the supernatural. They allowed the protagonists to record, share, and process information at speeds the ancient vampire just couldn't wrap his head around. And there's this one detail that brilliantly illustrates the psychological power of that tech. Mina uses her brand new Traveler's typewriter to transcribe Dr. Seward's audio diaries. So why does that matter? Because the actual act of typing lets Mina strip the raw, terrifying emotion right out of Seward's recorded voice. She takes the messy, panic-inducing sounds of his trauma and translates them into soothing, fixed, orderly text on a page. The typewriter is literally neutralizing the emotional horror of the vampire's attacks. It's a game changer. All right, Section 4, Mastering the English Language. Let's flip the script for a second and ask, what is Dracula's biggest anxiety? We always picture Dracula as this untouchable, all-powerful monster, right? But check out this confession he actually makes to Jonathan Harker. "I only know your tongue through books. I know not how to speak them." Dracula wants to move to London. He wants to be right in the middle of the whirl and rush of humanity. But he is deeply, intensely anxious about his English. He knows the grammar, sure, and the vocabulary, but he is entirely obsessed with perfecting his spoken intonation. Because his biggest fear? It's marginalization. He spells it out. If he's recognized by his accent, he's going to be branded a stranger. And in Victorian London, being a stranger in a strange land means you are nobody. He's been the absolute master of his own country for centuries. He outright refuses to be downgraded to some alien outsider just because he pronounces a vowel wrong. In his mind, a perfectly standardized English accent is the absolute requirement for taking over London. And you have to notice the incredible contrast between the foreigners in the text here. On one hand, you have Dracula, rigidly obsessed with getting this flawless, standard English accent so he can blend in. But then look at the heroes. You have Professor Van Helsing, a Dutchman, and Quincy Morris, an American. Van Helsing speaks with famously mangled, chaotic grammar, and Quincy uses this incredibly thick Texas slang. Yet, they navigate British society just fine. They're fully embraced by their English friends. Dracula completely fails to realize that the English language is naturally dynamic. His rigid textbook imitation keeps him completely static, while his enemies are linguistically mobile.
Finally, Section 5, the power of voice. Let's see how all of this builds to the ultimate question of who actually holds authority.
There is this deeply fascinating irony at play. Despite all of Dracula's intense studying to master the English voice, his ultimate authority is actually granted by someone else's voice. Renfield, the asylum patient, literally has to call the vampire into the building. He shouts, "Come in, Lord and Master." Think about that. The vampire, this creature who desperately wants to be the master of his entire domain, requires the spoken authorization of a lunatic just to cross the threshold. Dracula achieves his mastery only when he is verbally invited in. But it doesn't take long for Dracula to realize just how dangerous voices and the recordings of them really are. At the climax of this whole technological battle, Dracula breaks into the hero's sanctuary and tries to erase all oral and written evidence that he even exists. He burns their manuscripts, sure, but crucially, he throws the wax cylinders from the phonograph straight into the fire. He understands that this modern device, this thing that can capture a disembodied voice, is a massive, existential threat to his secrecy. And honestly, he wasn't wrong to be terrified of it. Listen to Mina's visceral reaction to hearing Dr. Seward's voice on the phonograph for the very first time. She calls it a wonderful machine, but it is cruelly true. It was like a soul crying out to Almighty God. Writing can hide things, right? You can mask the physical tremors of fear with a pen. But the phonograph? It captures the literal bodily anguish of the speaker's tone. It is a deeply uncanny, almost magical piece of late Victorian technology, and it leaves Mina feeling physically powerless just by listening to it. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. We've watched these characters use typewriters, shorthand, and phonographs to assert control over a chaotic, ancient evil. But when we look at the ashes of those wax cylinders, we really have to ask ourselves, does modern technology actually capture the truth and save us? Or does it merely archive our trauma and record our terror? It's a question that makes a century-old novel feel just as relevant today as the smartphone sitting in your pocket right now. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time on The Explainer.